Okay, good morning to you. I think that we have the situation under control and taken care of regarding use of, WebEx, YouTube, I don't know. The IT guys have been working with me, and I'm a hard case because of the closed caption, but that's okay. That's my job, and I'll do that closed caption and we'll get it all figured out. So hopefully this will be the beginning of our ability to accommodate virtually. So what we're going to start with today will be what I call Lecture 1, and it's going to be the lecture that would be for March the 16th, Monday, yesterday, because I've started this video today, which is Tuesday. So this is what you would see or hear from me if I was actually standing in front of you. My hope is that I'll be able to record for approximately 50 minutes so that you get that full lecture time. If you have questions during the lecture, please make sure you write them down, and then I'll address them, I'll answer them before the next lecture, or somewhere down the road I will respond to your questions. I encourage you to have the PowerPoint copied, printed, so that you can make notations, you can write things down, you can follow along. I'll let you know if something isn't going to be discussed. And I do know that I am going to be discussing figurative language in a little more detail that elaborates and is an extension of what's in the PowerPoint. So I encourage you to do that so that you can make notes. So get that PowerPoint. Okay, I think that maybe we are ready to go. All right, I will start, and I'm going to show this to you. I'll put it up. This is, if you can see it, the slide, and it looks backwards to me. I hope that you can see it. It says Chapter 6, Stages 4 and 5. It is on page 97 of my copy of the PowerPoint. I hope it is for yours. And it says 12/18/2018 in the upper right-hand corner. The first bullet says Stage 4, between the ages of 35 and 40 months, with a mean length of utterance of 3 to 3.75. And remember that mean length of utterance is words, okay? And I will watch the time here, so you'll see me do that upon occasion. Okay, so let's begin. All righty, so we know that Brown has how many stages? He has five stages. And in Chapter 4, we discussed Stage 1. And now we're going to finish those stages so that you can see the progression of development and cognitive maturation for the kiddos that you're going to be working with. As the child gets into Stage 4 and moves into Stage 5, that child is going to be able to add more words, more elaborate words. Again, with morphemes, we know that they are able to more clearly express to you what it is that they want to say to get their message across. Now, this is really important when we have children who are maybe upset or something terrible has happened, and they really have that need to explain to you what happened to them. Now, if they're crying, you might want to wait until they stop crying, but the better the vocabulary, the more words that they have, the better they are at getting that message across and communicating their wants and needs. And that's important for many different reasons. They are able to embed clauses. They're able to create more elaborate sentences. And just in general, that communication, those sentences are continuing to expand and grow. So as we saw in stage 4, the ages were between 35 and 40 months. Now as we get into stage 5, we're looking at 3.5 to 4 years. So there's really not so much of a big difference. It's just a continuation of those skills and developing those skills. By the end of stage 5, they've learned a lot. There's no doubt about that. They've learned a lot. And they've learned a lot of the basics that they need for communication and being able to express themselves as they enter into school. Excuse me. Okay. The next slide is telling us that even though they know a lot and they've learned a lot and they're able to communicate more effectively, they're good little communicators, excuse me, they are still struggling with some aspects as we would expect. The vocabulary continues to grow. They continue to learn more of the grammatical morphemes that helps with communication. We're hearing more modifiers, more suffixes, more prefixes, and the past tense forms are still coming along because those are a little more challenging for those children to learn because of the irregular nature of some of them. An interesting fact that is happening too is that children are learning contractions, and contractions are a higher level learning skill. The kids in formal language, I do not know the answer to his question. As we changed I do not to the contraction, it sounds a little more relaxed. It's a little easier speech. I don't know. I cannot go with you. I can't go with you. So if we were speaking more formally, we may not use those contractions. But children are learning contractions. And it is a higher level language skill because you're taking 2 words and condensing it to 1. You don't see contractions in professional writing too often. I would say that maybe historically researchers avoided contractions. We do see them sometimes, but knowing that a contraction may make the statement sound more informal, that's all the more reason to go with not using the contraction. But it is a higher level language skill. We also see that kiddos are using tag questions in stage 5 where they're adding huh. You ask them something, you say something, you get huh. Or they're using the word okay. And okay is a good word for them to use to try and control the situation and to manipulate what it is that they want. I want another cookie, okay? Okay, I can have another one. So you see how pragmatics begins to creep its way in. And they do continue to refine the language and the grammar. Okay, let's talk about pauses in conversation. It's really kind of interesting because we don't consciously think about pausing and what that pause indicates to somebody else. We just hope that they read the pause that we're making correctly. And according to our textbook, by the end of stage 4, the child recognizes that pauses more than 1 second in conversations means the end of the conversational turn. Pauses of more than 1 second in a conversation means the end of a conversational turn. And that conversational partner is not going to respond. Well, we certainly don't count how long we've paused, and 1 second is not very long. But we just automatically pick up on the social cue that if somebody has paused, and it may be in connection with what they've said, that the conversation is over. Pauses less than 1 second means the conversation will probably continue. Again, we don't time that. It's very difficult to do so. But we realize in conversations with others, and children sometimes do, sometimes don't, and it's a pragmatic skill, it's a social skill. If you're talking to someone that you see in the grocery store and you're in a hurry and you have an appointment, so you need to get out of there very quickly. Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm doing great. Yes, I'm in school. I'm taking biology, English, and geography this semester. And then you might look at your watch, and then you might look up at the person again. Oh, yeah, I'm very busy, just can't keep up with everything. I just had to run into the grocery store for just a second to get something and on my way to an appointment. You stop and you pause very quickly, and the person realizes, based on the context and the pause, that you are making this a short conversation. And children will pick up on the context and the words and your body language. If you're looking at your watch or you're watching the door, they will pick up on those cues. But we don't consciously think about, oh, that was more than 1 second, that was less than 1 second. By the end of stage 4 and the beginning of stage 5, turn taking increases. They are becoming a little more sophisticated, but they still like to interrupt conversations, and we know who those kiddos are. We have to teach them not to interrupt, or we have to teach them when they can interrupt. They have to be taught that skill. I can remember talking to a woman one time, and we were engaged in this conversation, and the child was walking up and began to say something to the mother, and she held out her hand, and she continued her eye contact with me, did not break eye contact, and the child stopped and waited. So the child had a cue, because they want to have their needs met immediately. They're still a little more egocentric, and they want you to meet those demands very, very immediately. And we know that the kiddos in the classroom are very much like that sometimes, and especially our kiddos who might have a diagnosis of ADD, or they're a little more impulsive. Maybe it's an only child who typically has their wants and their needs met immediately. My daughter was sort of like that. I can remember one time the 3rd grade teacher said she wants to have her needs met immediately. She comes right to me. And I thought, well, I've probably created a little bit of that. By the time the child is 5, he can maintain a topic for an average of 5 turns, as compared to the adult who's going to make 11 conversational turns. And so if you think about it, the adult could be 25, the child is 5, and the child is can make half as many turns as the adult, and that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And again, along the way, we're teaching not to interrupt, when to interrupt. Let the person finish what they have to say before you jump in. The conversation can be carried on depending on what we say, depending on how much we understand about what the child is saying. And we've all done this. Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's great. I'm happy for you. We're just making up something because we have no idea what they said. But they will repeat, they will try, they'll ask questions, but they still may have some difficulty identifying part of the message or part of what we have said to them. So there's that turn taking, there's that pragmatic component. The turn taking of keeping the conversation going, staying on task. If I'm trying to increase a child's attention span, I'll try and redirect them back to what I was saying so that I can keep them engaged a little bit longer to try and extend that attention span. Turn taking is important. We see it across playing games and sharing. So it is definitely a skill that helps you make friends. If you're not willing to take turns, your friends are going to not want to play with you. So that's maybe a way to explain it to a child too. Oh, okay, your friends, they want to play with you, but you have to play nice. You have to take turns. I'm now on page 99 on my PowerPoint, and this section, the slide at the bottom in chapter 6 says emergent literacy. Now, literacy is not a new topic for us. We have talked about literacy throughout the whole semester, and we keep coming back to it because every component of language is filled with literacy, or literacy plays a part in the child's growth in language. And let's face it, the words that we read in a book, it's just simply written language. It's language. So the storybooks, and golly, I don't think I've ever worked with a child who didn't like storybooks, who wasn't interested in sitting down and reading. And it's kind of a universal activity that draws lots of children in. It's a good social builder because you can talk about things that you see happening in the book, in the pictures that you like or you don't like, and sometimes you can relate it to things that happen in the classroom. Lots of storybooks teach lessons. We have books that a child can read while they're on the potty. We have books that talk about other children in our classrooms who are bullies. We have stories that talk about how I feel when my mom and dad divorce, when I have to move away, when grandma died. So storybooks really help us sometimes explain things to children, and it definitely is a way to teach a nice social lesson. By the end of stage 3 and through stage 4, 3 years or so, the child is much more able to sit and to listen. Now again, not all children are in the same place with the same skill at the same time. So out of 4 children, one of them may be able to sit and allow you to turn those pages and read every word. Another child may go halfway through that book, allowing you to read every word. Another child, you may have to skip. You may have to skip pages and just point out things that you see in the pictures. And another child may turn some pages and be off and running. So you're going to have different skills, but we're seeing more interest in books by the end of stage 3 and through stage 4. Also through books, children recognize letters. The letters make sounds. We have the alphabet. We're teaching the alphabet. We have sound letter association or letter sound association. We're talking about the names of letters, and that leads us to phonological awareness for sure. Phonological awareness is the child's ability to focus on the sound structure of his language. Phonological awareness. It's learning to identify a letter, a sound, putting that into a syllable, putting it into words, and then words into phrases and sentences. It is our ability to sound out words that we don't know very well or we've never seen before. Sometimes we're very successful at that, but if it's a word from another language, we know that some sounds aren't voiced. I had a student whose last name started with an H, and it was H-R, and then it continued with some other letters. I always wanted to say Hara to start her name, and the H was silent. And I can't remember how many times she told me that. It just took me a while to remember that. But the point is, sometimes the word that is spelled is not the word that we say. And it does typically happen in other languages. The phonological awareness does develop over time. It's a gradual development as children learn the alphabet, letter sound association. They've moved into syllables. We see it in rhyming words. We see it in adding morphology or morphemes to a word. So there is a gradual progression. It's a building block type of activity. Early reading, it's the fourth bullet on this particular slide. Early reading success shows that print concept knowledge and phonological awareness are the best predictors for school success. Early reading success shows that print concept and knowledge and phonological awareness are the best predictors for that success. There is a table on page 244. Let me look at it to see if it's something that I want you to refer to or if it's something that I think might help you. So let me get to page 244 and see. Oh, this is it's table 6-8, and it's the highlights from stage 4. So if you wanted to read and review the highlights from stage 4, you could refer to page 244. It puts it all together for you in a nice, neat little way. So it might be of some value to you. So you could refer to page 244 in your text. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the role of comprehension. And if you remember, comprehension is the information that you receive, that you take into your brain, and how you process it to understand it. Now, you can't really separate intellectual growth and language development from comprehension. They're intertwined. Intellectual growth leads to language development, which leads to comprehension. So they are very closely related, and they cannot be separated. What we say about things around us in our environment is generally the expressive component that tells us or tells the listener that we have understood what we're talking about. So the comprehension definitely leads to the expressive component, which tells the teacher how much the child really understands. And the third bullet in this slide, there is a section that says, clear thinking results in clear speaking and writing. If you can think it, understand it, comprehend it, then you should be able to speak about it and to write about it. Many of the language forms developed by the end of stage 5 require more time and experience. We've already talked about that, how things continue to progress. I'm on page 101 right now. And it's a continuation of the comprehension. We're going to talk about WH words. Who, what, where, when, and why, and how. And as speech pathologists, we do write goals, including WH words, in a therapy session, understanding the meaning of that WH word. When, how, and why develop a little bit later because they relate to concepts of time and causality. Let me repeat that. When, how, and why develop later because they reflect an understanding of time and causality. So think about this. When did you go home? When are you coming over? Why did you do that? How old are you? They all reflect an understanding, a comprehension of time. So the child must understand time before they're able to answer some WH questions. Before the child has developed an understanding of some of these words, he's going to respond to the question as if it was a what question. What questions develop early? They're easier to understand and they're easier to respond to. For example, what'd you have to eat? What would you like to wear? What is your name? We ask WH questions in the format of what pretty often. But we have to wait until the child is a little bit older to expect the correct response in some of these others. If I say to the child, how old are you? Okay, there's a how question that deals with time, and the child pauses and they might think, and you can see the wheels turning, and they might say, Billy, because how they can't answer. They don't have that concept of time. So they're going to answer it in a way that they understand. And so they'll answer it as a what question. And I've had that happen before. I've asked a child, what's your name? And then somebody else has asked a question, and then I say, well, how old are you, Billy? Or how old are you? And he thinks and he pauses and he stops and he gives me Billy because he doesn't have the concept of time just yet. Whoops. Now we're going to talk a little bit about figurative language. And this is kind of a fun topic for me because we do talk about figurative language in the clinic and we write goals regarding figurative language. In conversation, we talk in relational terms, spatial terms, temporal, quantity, dimension, but we also talk in figurative language. And figurative language, as I refer to some of my notes over here, includes metaphors, similes, irony, and idioms. And a metaphor describes something as if it was something else. Let me say that again. And I don't think this information about metaphors, similes, and irony is in the PowerPoint. A metaphor describes something as if it was something else. For example, life is a roller coaster. Describes something as if it was something else. Life gets described as a roller coaster. If you know what roller coaster is, then you know that someone's life may be up and down all the time. Metaphor describes something as if it was something else. Irony, it's something strange or funny because things happen in a way that seems the opposite of what you would expect. Let me say that again. Irony It sounds strange or funny because things happen in a way that are opposite of what you would expect. For example, a fire station burns down. Well, you certainly wouldn't expect the fire station to burn down because the firemen definitely know how to put out fires. This is another example. I liked this one and I wrote it down to share with you. Another example of irony. Remember, something gets said, it's strange, it's funny, and it sounds different than what you would expect. The most shoplift book in America is the Bible. Yeah, isn't that interesting? That's definitely some irony. The most shoplift book in America is the Bible. Not what you would expect. That is irony. A metaphor, describes something as if it was that was the metaphor. I already did that. The life is the roller coaster. Simile. It'll compare two things. Similarities between two things that must use like and as. Those two words, like and as, must be used. You're comparing the similarities. Her eyes were like diamonds. Well, you can translate that into her eyes were very sparkly. Simile, you're comparing two things using the words like and as. Her eyes were sparkly like diamonds. Now, as we look at idioms, the meaning has nothing to do with the word spoken. And the idiom is the most commonly used figurative language that we have. Now, children struggle with figurative language because it's abstract. And depending on their age, they don't understand humor. And some of these things are really funny. And so they're not understanding humor. They're not understanding higher level language skills and language that is more abstract. So what they're going to defer to will be facial expressions, body language, depending on what the figurative language is, they will maybe be able to guess at what it means, depending on the context. But as I said, the most common figurative language that we use is the idiom. And we're going to talk about a few idioms here for just a minute. What I'm using is an idiom dictionary. And the reason I'm using an idiom dictionary is because it's going to tell me the origin. It's going to be able to explain the idiom to me. Because if you can't explain an idiom to someone else, they're not going to understand it. We need to know what it means, and we need to know how to understand it before we try and teach them. We have English language learners, students, who come into the clinic to work on accent reduction and to work on our language. And figurative language is one of the topics that we talk about. And one of the idioms that I chose is chew the fat. What does chew the fat mean? So I want you to think about that. See if you can express. Can you communicate in an expressive way to someone who is from another country what that means? Well, if you just say chew the fat, it's going to be difficult for that person to maybe even use context to come up with what it means. So in my handy dandy little dictionary here, my friend and I sat up half the night just chewing the fat. Put it into a sentence. If you're going to teach figurative language, put it into context. That's how the individual is going to learn it the best. My friend and I sat up half the night just chewing the fat. The meaning, to have a friendly, informal talk to chat in a relaxed way. It also gives me the origin, which is something I really like. And let me see if I can just briefly give you the origin of chew the fat. In the late 1800s, this expression was popular in the British Army, and then it came to the United States. One possible origin might be that military and naval people were given tough meat to eat, and they had to chew the fat of the meat as they talked. Sort of makes sense. Okay, let's look at cook your goose. So what do you think that one might mean? This is on page 40. Cook your goose. So, it means to put an end to ruin someone's plans. Here's the example. I'm putting it in context, which would help the individual possibly understand what cook your goose means by the context. Lorraine let the air out of Andrew's tires. That really cooked his goose. The origin of this is, there is an old story about a medieval town under siege. The townspeople hung a goose from a tower as a symbol of stupidity, meant to slight the enemy. But the gesture backfired when the attackers were so angered by the goose that they burned the whole town down, literally cooking the goose. Let's try cut off your nose to spite your face. How would you, if you were in a teaching setting, how would you explain cut off your nose to spite your face to someone who was from another country and didn't know our language? It means to injure yourself out of anger toward another, to make a situation worse for yourself when angry with someone. Here's the example in context. Stay home because your ex-girlfriend is going to the dance with Juan. Why cut off your nose to spite your face? Don't stay home because your ex-girlfriend is going to the dance with Juan. Why cut off your nose to spite your face? Here's the origin. Some people were using the proverb in Latin as early as 1200. There may have been a story about cutting off part of a long, ugly nose only to succeed in disfiguring the whole face. Apply that same idea to any spiteful action you commit against another person that ends up harming only you. Get under your skin is another idiom. Oh, he gets under my skin. He makes me angry. He makes me irritated. Then I had out of the frying pan and into the fire. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. First you were late. Now you spilled glue all over the teacher's desk. You jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. You went from one bad situation and into a worse situation. Watched pot never boils. This will be the last one I show you. Watched pot never boils. In context, waiting for the mail carrier isn't going to make the letter come any sooner. A watched pot never boils. The meaning, when waiting anxiously or impatiently for something to happen, it seems to take much longer. So, if you are in a situation in a classroom, you're the teacher, you're the speech pathologist, and you're going to, maybe you have bilingual children in your classroom, and you're going to teach some idioms, some funny things that we use in our language, some funny expressions. I encourage you, you have to get a resource that's going to help you know what it means, the origin, and that's also going to help you to explain it. And it's a situation sometimes in which we say, I know what it means. I know what it means. I just don't know how to explain it. There's that receptive expressive gap that we talk about, that receptive expressive gap in language. And you want to teach idioms in context because it does facilitate understanding, comprehension of the meaning. Okay. The next point that I want to talk about in chapter 6, and there is quite a bit of information in chapter 6 on bilingualism. We see it in our culture every place. We are a bilingual melting pot. You will probably have bilingual children in your classroom. And I think that bilingualism enhances our language and learning experiences for sure. We've talked about how bilingual learners have two languages that are active. They seem to have better language skills, or their language skills progress a bit faster. And because they have to hold those two languages active. But we do have to make sure we understand the difference between somebody who is a productive bilingual and somebody who is a receptive bilingual. And there is a difference between those two terminologies. The productive bilingual, if I said, oh, Susie over there is a productive bilingual, she's truly competent in both languages, English, Spanish, English, French. And even if one is more dominant than the other, it makes no difference. But she is able to switch back and forth and is productive in both. The receptive bilingual has a dominant language and understands a second language, understands the second language, and maybe can read it, but is not a proficient speaker. So there is a difference. Parents of bilingual children in your classroom might be able to understand a little bit about what you're saying, but they can't read it, and they certainly can't speak it. And I think the children probably would be more productive bilinguals, and the parents are maybe more receptive bilinguals. Okay. In most cases, the child will be more proficient in one language and then the other, especially in the very beginning. But then at some point, one of the two languages will become dominant, just because of being in the classroom, or maybe where their parents are working and they go to work with their parents, and there are primarily English-speaking people there. If they learn two languages at the same time, which does happen often, there's simultaneous acquisition, simultaneous learners of those languages. And some experts argue that the term simultaneous acquisition should be used only if the child can acquire both languages before their third birthday. And if you live in a home where you were born and it's bilingual, probably by your third birthday you will be bilingual. Learning two languages can present special challenges for sure. You have two vocabularies to learn. You have two rules to learn, and the syntax is different. Okay, if one language is dominant, and usually one language is dominant, that vocabulary and grammatical rules may continue to influence the non-dominant language. And you have to stop and think about the structure, the syntax. Okay. Um, we definitely have to consider the family's traditions and their culture when we have kiddos in our classroom. We certainly don't want to erase their culture or erase their traditions. We want to maintain that and then teach them the English language and English traditions along with that. Um, I think what I might do, well, we've got 5 minutes. Let me see if maybe I can get through this part of chapter 6. Code mixing definitely is what bilingual children and adults do. They're mixing both languages until they discover that dominant language. And it's definitely influenced by what the child's exposed to. That makes sense. According to the text, there's 3 stages in bilingual development. I don't know that we're going to talk about that, so I don't think you need to worry about that. Let's see if there's something else on this page, and then we'll finish up. Okay. So the last point that I want to make about bilingual learning, some people have a greater aptitude for learning languages than others. Remember when we talked about Gardner and he had those 8 levels of intelligence, and one of them was focusing on some languages. But some people just learn those languages quicker, faster. It's just easier for them than other learners. Some children who are learning a second language are proficient within 1 year, and sometimes it takes 2, 3, or 4. Again, it depends on that exposure, how often, who's speaking it, how long they're in it for one time. But research really doesn't point to a clear age demarcation that says this is a certain age that you have to learn that language, that second language, and it's easier and it's more efficient. So according to this reference in your textbook, there is no evidence that age in itself is an impediment to acquiring a second language. So what they're saying is, my age at 65, I could learn a language, and I could learn it well. Well, I'm not sure about that, but that's the point. That's what they're saying. We retain the biological ability to learn language as long as we have good, healthy brains, and we have good sensory mechanisms and functional speech mechanisms, and everything is working well. I would have said, oh yeah, you teach children Spanish at a younger age in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and it carries on through high school. It's easier for them than starting to learn that language as a freshman in high school. But according to the research, there's no evidence in itself that age is an impediment to acquiring a second language. Okay, guys, that would end up chapter 6. And that would take the place of Monday's lecture. So hopefully I'll be able to get this on for you. I apologize for everything that we've had to go through, but we'll get through it together. I will see you. This was lecture 1, and I will see you during lecture 2. Okay.